James, welcome to Manifesto's YouTube channel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed our last talk, which was where you interviewed me on your podcast, The Rooster's Crow. I think, what is it? Interviews with you, or no, what's the section called where you interview people?
Conversations with you.
Conversations with you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was a really great conversation we had some time ago. And then I've been following you a little bit and watching some of the things you've been doing. And the reason why I reached out this time and want to have this conversation is because people who know anything about me know that, I've been working with self-development, and especially working with men and the stories that we tell about men for quite some time. And this has led me down an amazingly interesting path. But one of the things that happened is that with especially Jordan Peterson, I started looking at Christianity in a new light as a source of wisdom instead of just like superstition and fairy tales. And was encouraged or received encouragement. You have to contend with the Bible, with the church fathers, with this ancient story, tens of thousands of years old, and take it seriously. You can't just write it off. And when I did that, then it kind of really blew my mind. And today I'm converted to an Orthodox Christian, and found that the system that I found in Orthodox Christianity and the church fathers is really a map of the territory that just puts together all of the truthful and good things that I'd been able to understand before from every single other area of my life. So before, in my childhood as growing up as a more fundamentalist Christian, then I saw Christianity as opposed to almost all other areas of wisdom and knowledge. And now I've really seen how, wow, it actually just, it brings everything together. And there's no opposition between, from if it's psychoanalysis and Lacan and Freud, and even paganism has deep truths about the human condition. And I don't have to see these as a battle between each other. And so I've been looking through your YouTube channel and just saw a lot of content which really spoke to exactly this. And you have playlists about Nietzsche, Heidegger, Deleuze, and things like this. And then you have about, Gregory Pamlas and St. Maximus the Confessor. And I can really see how you're bringing things together. You grew up in the Orthodox Church. You have a Greek background, right? And so yeah, maybe let me do a quick introduction for people who don't know you. So I think you're into philosophy and psychoanalysis. You have a degree in philosophy, and you run this Rooster's Crow podcast. You're a YouTube content creator, and you're also the director of a pediatric healthcare or home health for especially medically fragile children, which gives a really firsthand experience of this kind of what is the meaning of all this kind of stuff, I could imagine you get confronted with some things there. So that's what I wanted to do, is to, and it feels like a very big project and almost impossible, because certainly for myself, I had this impression that, the insights that I've received, that it's really been insights that I've received, and no amount of discussion or argument or, kind of like debating with other people could have given me this realizations that I've had. But I still feel like, it's worthwhile engaging in a dialogue. And maybe it seems like you've delved into kind of the secular philosophical, development of ideas, and have then also been able to bring together the church fathers and our ancient ways of thinking inside the church, in a way. So yeah, that's kind of what does that sound like a realistic project to you, or what does that sound like? Are we crazy to try this?
Yeah, no, that's with the YouTube channel, I don't know what I'm doing. I started, really it was the pandemic that kind of forced me. I was at home, I was working from home, and it was really the book, Father Seraphim Rose actually was Father Damascene's book, Christ the Eternal Tao. And I got the book, and it was just, through Jordan Peterson, especially Jonathan Peugeot, and kind of the overlap of between their work. And then finding Father Seraphim Rose, I had a really deep interest in Taoism, and I was kind of practicing. I was teaching Qigong, which is a type of energy work, cultivation, meditation, things of that nature. And when I found Father Seraphim Rose and his life and his works, I have a bunch of playlists reading from that book. And I read Christ the Eternal Tao from cover to cover, and that was really my first video. I didn't have a mic or anything. I'm like, I just sat in a room with a tripod and my phone, and I just read into it. And I did that right after I read the book once. And I'm like, for some reason, I'm like, I got to read this on YouTube. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And then I kept,
that
kept
playlist
doing
still
that.
there. I just saw it where you're just sitting and there's for every chapter, there's a new video, right? Where you're reading up the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I still have people, it's funny, people will comment on it and be like, wow, thanks for reading this book. And, from a, a couple of years ago now. So it's interesting. People are finding his work and, about him, he was a secular, he was born into a kind of Protestant Christian family and fell away from the faith and really was, inundated by the nihilism that he saw so prevalent in the world. And he studied Buddhism and he studied philosophy very deeply. He was a kind of a Nietzsche scholar almost, and then, he ultimately found orthodoxy, and then, his explication and ability to articulate the secular insights in light of, the fullness of the truth of the Orthodox faith was profound for me. And I think has been for many others and will continue to be. I think his influence is just beginning to be felt. Yeah.
So I actually haven't read that book yet. I've been encouraged to read it, and I actually looked for it when I started digging into your work, and then I found it's actually not in print anymore, and it's really expensive to buy it. But can you, what is that book about? And can you tell us, like, what did you get out of it as well?
Well, part of it is exploring the Tao Te Ching, kind of the first part in light of, orthodoxy in a sense, and something that kind of, became apparent to me is this idea of the logos, which from a philosophical standpoint, it was really made, popular a long time ago by Heraclitus. Taoism, the way, right? The way is a good, map to the logos, right? And then the idea is that there has been many instances of the logos. The Stoics had this concept of logos spermaticos, where the truth, right, the logos has seated itself throughout history, throughout time, in different places, right? So my kind of holdup with Christianity or believing in one particular faith was like, so what does that do with all the other faiths? What does that do with all the other people that so, fervently believe the other faiths? And it's like, well, the logos, which is this, more abstract idea of God, was planted in, let's say, the Taoism, Buddhism, Zen, Native American, the Nordic religions, in a sense, the Hebrews, the pagans even, right? They all had a certain quality. They had a certain, fidelity to the logos within them. And then the idea in Christianity is that the logos became man, right? The logos, the ultimate fundamental organizing principle of reality, manifested itself. The mystery became man for us to follow, right? So the truth became apparent. It became from this abstract principle to this person. And then following this person, following his commandments, following his life, has this transformative effect on the person, right? You become part of Christ's body in a sense. And we were talking offline about how it's difficult to explain these things because it's not like most philosophical discourse. You present an argument, and that argument, will have counter arguments, and hopefully one side is right and the other is wrong. But with this, I saw a quote, I think it was from, I forgot where I read it. It was actually from this Lacan and Orthodoxy book, where it said that orthodoxy is not the arbiter of truth, it's the fullness of the truth, right? So because orthodoxy is true doesn't make Taoism false, right? There are different levels or qualities of truth, right? And then orthodoxy is the fullness of truth because of Christ's life. And then wrestling with, well, truth is when you have an experiment, right? You have a hypothesis, and then you have an experiment. And then if that results match your kind of hypothesis, right, then that's a truth event. So how could Christ, a person, a God that came and died and was resurrected, be the truth? What does that do with ideas of scientific truth? And how can we square the two? That's something that I was wrestling with. And you can actually kind of see my conversion or my realization of the truth of orthodoxy through the last couple of years in my YouTube videos, specifically reading René Girard, reading Marshall McLuhan, even Heidegger. I've recently come back to Heidegger in his later work, the philosophy of the event. And the reading it now again with new eyes, it just was mind blowing. He was kind of intuiting, the apocalyptic and kind of deep rooted nature of reality that I see so much in the church fathers. he was putting words that was very, close to orthodoxy. And I was like, wow. So I just started reading from him as well, his later kind of works there. And it all kind of culminates into this, apocalyptic, nature that we are living in right now, and the apocalypse means, it doesn't mean, Armageddon. Apocalypse is a Greek word, and apokalypsi means things hidden are being revealed, right? And then Rene Girard wrote a book, The Foundation, Things Hidden since the Foundation of the World. I think that's the title, right? So there's all these secular and religious people intuiting this kind of trajectory of nature and history that we're on right now. So, kind of trying to, there's no overarching way of putting these ideas together, something that sparked or captured my attention. Instead of just reading it by myself, I read it on YouTube, and that's the channel essentially.
Yeah. And so then that's led to you exploring a whole lot of ideas and putting out a whole lot of material as well. And yeah, I think this idea of like, Christ being the incarnation of the Logos, of this higher principle, certainly when I grew up, and I see this everywhere. I just had a talk with someone about, like religion, and the dictionary definition of religion is belief in and worship of a supernatural entity or being of some kind, a God. And for me, like, I really had a difficulty of saying, well, if that's the definition of a ritual, of a religion, I don't really know if I'm into religion as such, because I don't see that as, I don't see, I grew up with this belief like, oh, there's like God, and he's kind of like a man, but he's much stronger than man. He's like a Superman, and he's up there in the clouds, and he's, like, I can talk to him and he'll talk back to me in some different way. And then, but he's watching out, and he's kind of like the policeman, right? He's telling me what to do and what I can't do, and watching out and making me feel guilty or something like that, right? And I realized, like, in some ways I can say, well, maybe that's not, for some people that can probably be a working way of understanding God, but it's also been very destructive. And it's been more and more framed in a kind of materialist mindset, which has really not been able to hold together. And so I don't know, and I've tried to explain this to people, but it's difficult, I think, to break out. It's almost like I need to go back to other Eastern religions, because this is something that people do understand, right? In the West, we have this sudden fascination with kind of like Buddhism and Taoism and this kind of thing. So I don't know, I guess that's been the path for many people. I was an atheist for most of my adult life, and my path back to Christianity was through Tantra and Buddhism and these kinds of things as well, to reconnect to the idea of spirit in a way that actually made sense to me.
Yeah, no, right on. I think that's very resonant, with kind of my path as well. I fell away from the church. I stopped going to church around 11, 12 years old, and then didn't start going till I was, 37. Right. So that's a long time, and really got deeply into philosophy, and, always searching for something. And with regards to religion, I like using, the etymology of words. So, the etymology of religion, the root word is ligament, right? That which binds us. And it's something that it's a fractal idea, right? And ultimately it culminates in the ultimate thing that binds us as a community, as a human species, as in the world, right? But it stacks up and down. So what is it that binds you at work, right? Your work has a mission, right? And then, it has a logo, even, in a sense, right? And the people that you work with, right, are bound together by the mission of that company, right? What about a football team like let's say the New England Patriots, right? What binds them together is this community of people that, believe in the ethos of the Patriots, right? And, that scales up and down, right? And in a country, in America, what is it that makes you an American, right? Something that, a culture and ethos that binds us together, that gives us an identity that we share with each other, right? And the breakdown of this, right? And that doesn't mean that it's a perfect situation. There are many work environments that are toxic. There are many teams that are toxic, and there are many aspects of a nation that are toxic, right? And that's just, part of kind of how it is. But you cannot not identify with something. So the question is, what are you identifying with, and how is that orienting you in your life?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's almost like the more that we've rejected words like religion, I've been looking a lot into ritual recently as well. We've really rejected, like, rituals, those are like something that superstitious people do down in Africa and tribal societies. And as modern people, we don't need rituals. We don't need religions. it's like the religious and the ritualized aspects of our behavior become even more and more pronounced the more that we've kind of rejected it, right? And this, of course, goes to, like what Carl Jung says about like the unconscious, but what Jordan Peterson's also been saying all the time. It's like, these things, they come back and bite you even more if you're trying to repress them as well. So yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense about how religion. I didn't actually know it. Did you say it was ligaments? That's what it shares the same ground, which is really interesting, I think, as well, because like the ligament is what binds the muscle to the bone, right? And so there's something really symbolic about that as well as religion. You have to be. We have a collective identity, and so what is it that we're centering ourselves around? And maybe it's Netflix, which is the most kind of gathering principality that or Google or something like that, right? That's really, those are the stories, the lens on reality that we're gathered around and that we're centered around in our own fragmented, individualized little corona isolated homes these days, right?
Yeah, or corona. Coronavirus is something that is binding people together in very strange ways, and things like racism, things like identity politics, right? It's impossible to, and it's a good insight that you brought up, like things like worship and ritual, they don't go away. If you try to deny them, they come back in monstrous ways, right? And they become unconscious. They become idols. Like, we worship, we cannot help but to worship. The question is, what are we worshiping? And are we consciously worshiping, the highest high? Are we orienting, or, what you worship orients your life in a sense. If you're worshiping the founding of the racism of the founding fathers, right? It's going to orient your life that you see racism everywhere, right? You see everything in terms of these, racial and disintegrating ways of looking at things. So what is it that you're worshiping in a sense? And this is something that
Can you unpack that word worship a little bit more? Because I think a lot of people will hear that and say, well, I don't worship racism, or I don't worship anti-racism or something like that. So what does it actually mean to worship something, would you say?
Yeah, well, again, going back to the Bible and the 10 Commandments, something that was a sticking point for me was the first commandment: thou shalt not have a God over me, right? It's like, wait a minute. So this God is jealous and he wants all of our attention, and that didn't kind of make sense to me. But the second and third commandments talks about how, you should not worship idols. Idols are not just golden statues that you have in your room and that you worship by bowing down. Idols are ideologies, right? And worshiping an ideology is something like, worshiping woke ideology, or more secular terms, worshiping money, right? Worshiping status, worshiping power is a big one. That's something I've been thinking about really lately, is the ontology of power. But worshiping status, worshiping material goods, and it's people will say, I don't worship these things. Well, you do, because it's the thing that you use to orient your life, right? To get the new house, to get the new car, to get the hot girlfriend, whatever it may be. And the idea is, if you invest your human desire unconsciously into anything but the mysterious, infinite one God, right? Then it will lead to destruction. It will lead to a disorientation. And a good way to think about it is, the midlife crisis, right? So you see, let's see, some man that, believed everything society told him, got the house, got the job, got the college degree, got the job, became, at the top of his field in his job, got the family, got the home, right? Which is here, you've got it all, right? But when he becomes 50 years old, there's a realization that happens where, wow, I'm not fulfilled. There's always this next thing. When I get the new house, I'll be fulfilled. When I get the promotion, I'll be fulfilled. So this chasing after fulfillment is a form of worship, because that thing is what's orienting you, to and motivates you.
Humans are fundamentally religious, ritualized beings that find meaning through ritualized religious behavior, and which ultimately results in worship. It's a becoming one with the things that we desire the most. We're driven by eros, really. That can be eros towards money, towards status, towards a woman, or towards God. And so what we're saying, and I think this is where, so there's so many people these days, and a lot of people who I talk to will consider themselves spiritual but not religious. And so the sticking point, and this is something which I think is I really get it why this is so difficult. It's like they can agree with all of these things and this way of seeing human beings and our behavior, but it's when you try and identify that universal principle of the good with the Abrahamic God and Christ as such, right? It's like, that's where they're like, oh, now you're being intolerant, or now you're, being exclusionary or whatever, or they just haven't seen that, right? And so I don't know, can you, what was it for you that helped you to make that connection?
Yeah, no, I think I was in that boat of being spiritual and not religious. When people would ask me, are you from Greek? Are you Greek Orthodox? I would say, yeah, culturally, but I don't, go to church or, do any of those kind of silly things in a sense. Right. And it was the, observing the, people go to church, throughout, live in America here, a lot of Protestant churches and whatnot. And, friends and families are going to church, but their life doesn't change. Their life doesn't transform. They're still, mean to their spouse. They're still, kind of a jerk to their kids. And, I would judge people like that. So it's like, I, like many people, looked to the East, right? Because in the East, it seemed like all these people that are participating in meditation, that are participating in chanting, that are doing these cool esoteric things, they would have some form of a transformation in their life. And I went on that path myself. I studied Taoism and practiced Qigong, energy cultivation, did chanting and mudras, and a lot of new age stuff like lucid dreaming and doing dream work and journaling and channeling, all this stuff, right? And it, I started a healing business. Like I went through what from the outside looked like a mental break. I left my 6-figure job and I started a company called Trinity Energy Works, where I was going to help teach people how to heal themselves through meditation, through energy work, through soft, kind of yoga like Qigong movements in a sense. Mm-hmm. And it transformed my life intensely. Right. But it almost dissolved my marriage, and it disrupted all of my relationships with friends and family members, because I was spiritually inflated. Like I got, I know these kind of esoteric Gnostic answers, like, and all this stuff. So it felt from the inside that what I was doing was for the greater good, but it really was for my ego inflation. Right. So there's a big difference, and I'm still very mindful of it. In Orthodoxy, we have a term called prelest. Right, prelest is falling into spiritual matters that inflate the ego, but you are all unaware of that process. And that's a good way to think of worship. Right, it's something that you're not aware that you're doing, and you're doing it, and it has real world effects in your particular life within the environment that you live in. Mm-hmm. So doing these things, my marriage was stressed, and God bless my wife, she stuck with me. I started, eating, I ate fruits and vegetables. I was on a weird diet for a year. I lost 30 pounds. I shaved my head, and everybody's would be scared to ask me what's going on. And I'd be like, oh, they just don't understand. I found Qigong, and I found how to cultivate energy, and, I'm developing sadhanas, and eventually I'm going to be, be able to kind of see into the future. And I'm going to, all this stuff. And looking back on it now, if I didn't go through that, psychedelics was part of it. If I didn't go through that, I would have never found orthodoxy again like I did. Mm-hmm. So it's not a bad thing, but it's very prominent right now. And like you're saying, spiritual, not religious. There's so many people that say that. And we hear someone says, the universe is looking out for you, or, the universe will return, kind of the good deeds that you're doing. Like, what do you mean by universe? Like what, the physical stars and the moon, like in the stuff that we look up in the sky? Like, it's like people say it and they're just afraid to say the word God, and they're afraid to, for right reasons. But I think we're finding, as like you were commenting here, we're finding that you can't get rid of religion. You can't get rid of that which binds us, right? There will be something that binds us, and there will be, political instantiations of this binding that may work temporarily, but ultimately they don't, they don't do what is ultimately kind of the actual core of religion, which we see flooding back these days. Yeah. And just kind of lastly, you notice that, and you can worship, or you can entertain or explore all of these cool esoteric Eastern traditions, Buddhism, Zen, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, right? And it's so cool, and everybody's very interested when you talk about it. But when you say it's everything but Christianity, if you start talking, say I'm a Christian and whatnot, it's like automatically shut off. Oh, you're a zealot or a backwards person. And you need to ask yourself, why is that? What is that that's doing that, right? Where the one thing that's kept from us is really, through popular culture is really to look at Christ as the truth and as God, right? Everything else is cool. As crazy as it sounds, meditating for 6 hours, leaving your body, traveling the astral realm, right? But when it comes to, thinking of or engaging with Christ, it's frowned upon, right? Even in the secular sense, Christianity had this effect on the world of the West. Like, even if it's totally wrong, if it's totally false, the fact this false thing, right, had this completely organizing effect of the world, you got to, maybe that's a reason you can kind of look at it like a Tom Holland kind of, right?
Well, I would say, like the spiritual, not religious, they're obviously participating in a religion. It's just it's a religion of spiritual, not religious. And you look at like, what is the details of that? Well, it's an individualist religion. It fits in very well with our individualist culture. So it's this fragmented, atomized, me and my personal beliefs, and no one needs to tell me what I believe in, right? And so it's lacking that whole communal aspect of, well, actually bringing things together and submitting to something that's far greater than ourselves, right? That's drawing on inheritance and a tradition. And so, that's something that I think people are becoming more aware of. And certainly in the people I'm talking to in our network, then there's this understanding like, well, you need to find a tradition and you need to become a part of that tradition. You can't just say like, oh, I'm going to be the arbiter and the decider of all of these things. And I saw just Jonathan Peugeot talking to a guy called Styx, who was like, he's an occultist or something like that. Really interesting conversation. But especially the very first 10 minutes or something like that, where Jonathan, I think, laid out really well, you want to go up a mountain and there's the sense if you're dabbling just in all the kinds of other little things and you're getting a little bit from here, a little bit from Christianity, a little bit from that, you're just staying down in the foothills, really. You can be a really intelligent person and you can understand a lot of stuff from there. But, spiritual practice isn't about, kind of like getting the new insight. It's about practice. It's about engaging in a path where you're actually climbing a mountain, and that takes effort. And I think in many ways, Orthodoxy and Buddhism, they have that understanding. I think a practice like Tai Chi and whatever it is also has that, but it's like, at least you need to commit to one thing. Even if, it's like, fine, if you're not ready for Christianity, it's like, well, most of us in the West, we grew up with that. But I think certainly there's an understanding of like, committing to a path that, and getting a mentor, a guide who's committed, who's inside a tradition, and not, someone who has a great website and promising you like, oh yeah, just like, you can have it all, pleasure and the whole thing, like the hot wife and all the money, and there's something inherent, and especially if he's earning good money from telling you this, right? Like the religion as commercialized business, which is where we're seeing a lot of it today, of course, right?
Yeah, the televangelist, prosperity gospel, the large mega church, Joel Osteen, and it's not a judgment, right? Because people could go and participate in this church and this group and really get some a lot out of it. But I think it's not aiming to the highest high. It's not really Christ centric, and I don't know, I don't want it to put a judgment on anybody's particular flavor of religion, but it's this idea that you just brought up. And, this came up for me as well when you were talking about that. Was Jonathan's conversation with Styx Hexenhammer, who is someone that I've been following for the last, few years. He has a lot of interesting and nuanced political commentary. I think he lives in Scandinavia now. He's from Vermont. And, he is exactly kind of where I was, right? And where you don't notice, you abstract yourself from the environment, right? And like a buffet, you look at a spiritual buffet, like I'm going to take from, Native American, I'm going to take from the Hindu religion, I'm going to take from Buddhism, and I'm going to take from Taoism, and it's going to be kind of a cornucopia of fun spiritual practices. And then I can, through YouTube, figure out different things to do in a sense. And it feels very real and it feels very alive when you do it. But ultimately, there's nothing to root you into reality. There's nothing to ground you into.
Well, what I was really thinking about when you were talking about your spiritual journey is that it's not like those things you were working with are not working, and it's not like they're just rubbish. It's maybe, would you agree, like the difference now is that you actually just have gained a respect and a humility for like what you're stepping into as a single human being with very limited experience as you enter, the spiritual realms. And that one of the dangers there is that you think like, well, I can be the one deciding over all these things. Whereas if we look at the church fathers that were going out into the desert, like they had a total different understanding of like encountering spiritual beings, right? And so I see many people today who any spiritual experience that is like, you know, outside of the normal, we're so hungry for it that if we get something like that, then we automatically, you know, are attracted more and more to it, and we're almost willing to sacrifice everything, our entire lives, to follow this kind of spiritual experience, right? And some of these experiences, I know a guy who goes out to the forest and then suddenly he gets this impulse, he needs to stand like this, and then he's channeling a spirit out in the forest. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, that's a trident. That seems like Poseidon. And the things that he then gets inspired to do, they're kind of like pagan-y Poseidon-like, right? So I'm like, dude, you just met Poseidon. Like, you know, do you know anything about Poseidon? And he's like, no, but it's a really powerful feeling and it's really great. And I do it all the time and it's really, really good, right? And it's like, well, you know, there's no discernment, there's no depth, there's no understanding of human history. Like, you know, people for tens of thousands of years have associated the specific symbol of a trident with a specific god. And you know, we can look at how cultures went that worship that god, because there's been plenty of them, right? And so, you know, it's like, yeah, they've got a lot of power, they've got a lot of influence, they've got a lot of wealth. There's also been a lot of violence and aggression and unbridled war of all against all on these pagan ideas, right? Which doesn't make that all paganism is bad. It's just like we need discernment when we enter into these realms.
Yeah, that's I think that speaks greatly to this idea of what worship is and what an idol is, right? The whole warning of the commandment, thou shalt not make graven images, thou shalt not have idols. Idols are, you know, these things that capture our attention. It doesn't mean that they're not real. It means that they're just, you know, they operate at a higher level than our general perception, right? And they capture our attention. And if they're not handled appropriately, they will lead to destruction and disintegration and war, in a sense. So it's kind of a warning. You know, we make idols of things, and we can do that with spiritual practice, gurus, you know, ideologies. And it's this idea of ideology is really important, right? Because were the German people, they were worshiping Hitler, right? They were worshiping the Nazis, in a sense. So Germany was the kind of cutting edge of cultural, social, scientific, philosophical thinking, right? Good people too. They loved their neighbors. They loved their pets. You know, Hitler himself was a big pet, you know, enthusiast. How did these people become Nazis? That's a question that Jordan Peterson has wrestled with for a long time. The question is, so that is something important to explore, especially in our time when we're seeing a lot of this happen, right? And it's a sort of hypnotism is another good way of kind of looking at it. You know, how did this ideology capture so many people, in a sense? And because it was a certain spirit working through Hitler. Hitler was a very passionate, you know, craftsman in terms of communicating. But what was he communicating? And what did that do? It binded people together, right? It binded a certain people together. But what was the aim, right? And what ultimately came of that? So it's a stark warning that these things are always around and present with us, in a sense. And we think that it can't happen here. You know, last 70 years, we've been in a kind of big sleep. It's like, you think it can't happen here, that these are things that we've left behind. But I would put forth that it is happening now. And I can see it, and I can see it plain as day. And you know, these ideas that we're talking about here of worship and ritual and ideology and idols, right? Exploring them will give you the discernment, like you're saying, to hopefully not get captured and, you know, brought up into this, you know, this kind of upswell that we're seeing. You know, the coronavirus.
A lot of people are looking out in the world right now, looking at the media cycle, and they're thinking like, what is happening here? Like, people are crazy. They're totally crazy. And this makes no sense. And I can't explain it. They're just idiots. That's what people are thinking. But when you understand religion and you understand the way these things work, you say like, oh, it's the same thing that's always been happening. This is the exact same thing that's just playing itself out again. And I think especially René Girard has been a real key to understanding how like paganism and the pagan scapegoating ritual is just being played out, and how this is seen everywhere. And so, yeah, that's a part of the thing. And I don't think we're going to dig into, we'd spoken before that there's a couple of people who wanted to talk about and kind of translate a little bit. And so this includes René Girard. And then I think Marshall McLuhan's a guy I really want to understand more of, and I think you understand quite a lot of as well. And then Deleuze is a I think a postmodern philosopher who I've seen his name very often. I have a couple of friends, especially one good friend who's really into Deleuze and has totally changed his life perception through this. But I know very little about it as well. So I thought that would be interesting to have you explaining a little bit here. So I'm just laying out some little breadcrumbs now for if we're going to have a future conversation that trying to understand these things and using them to understand, well, what's actually happening out in culture in society at the moment, because it's actually not craziness. It's actually just the patterns of human society that have always been there. And these are the things that religions are really trying to get a handle on and manage in some ways, right? Would you
Yeah,
it's saying it?
We're moving from this idea of relativism that is kind of, baked into our secular materialist mindset that, that's your truth, but that's not the truth. There is no ultimate truth, Nietzsche in a sense, right? That everything is relative in a sense. That's not true, right? There is a fundamental pattern. There is a fundamental way of being that organizes reality for well-being to flourish. And there are ways which organizing, reality that does not make it flourish in a sense, to talk about it in secular terms. So to double click a bit on Deleuze. So I found his work for 2010, right? And his work is very hard to penetrate. He speaks in, he uses language in very kind of unique and different ways. And he captured my attention, for a good 8 years, right, of studying his work. And then the way that you read his work, it affects your consciousness. It affects how you think. It's not just information that you take in and consider. You take in, and it's hard to kind of explain. It changes the way you see the world. And I remember I would, read some Deleuze, and then I would, get away from it for a bit, and then, come back to it, and like it would change the way you see the world in the way that kind of different relationships, psychological, social, cultural, kind of operate and work, with each other. That was a very powerful kind of thing. And it's hard to explain, but he's ultimately describing, he's doing in metaphysics, right? He was a postmodern guy, and metaphysics was a bad word, right? Any grand meta narrative was a big no-no to discuss, by the French postmodernists, but he was doing he was like a spiritual metaphysics of materialism in a sense. And he uses these, kind of dichotomy of the actual and the virtual, and what we're in a process of doing always is actualizing the virtual. And the virtual is this kind of network of connections and patterns that we operationalize by participating in them in a sense. So there's a lot of, I think, maps there. It maps really well to orthodoxy in a strange way, and I haven't really been able to think through it yet. But what we do is we embody patterns, we embody spiritual patterns in the physical world, right? Mm-hmm. He uses the term virtual, right? So, we could, spend some time on that and unpack that, but I think it's something that's, it's very interesting. And I think the psychoanalysts, something that I'm very drawn to, right? Because what does psyche means? Psyche in Greek means the soul. So psychoanalyst is analyzing the soul, right? Psychology is the logos of the psyche. So it's a secular way of doing religion in a sense, right? But it's, I think it's necessary. And I think, people like Nietzsche, people like Heidegger, people like even Freud and Marx, and these people that we look on in a very critical way because their project seems to be, leading to the disintegration of the structures that hold our society together. I would say that they are worth looking into, but they have to be appropriately looked into because it's easy to be captured in their ideology and capture it in and be like, oh, we need to destroy the capitalist state. It's capitalism, it's the bourgeois that are the problem, or it's white privilege and white supremacy. Like, it's so easy to be captured in there. So it's hard to explore these ideas and these topics without discernment, because you will get captured and kind of brought into it. So be mindful of that.
The way I see it is a lot of the Western project of science and technology. We've learned so much, but as we've done that, we've lost our view for the whole. And so as we delve down into details, then we focus increasingly, so, one could say Marx, well, he was very focused on the plight of the worker, of the proletariat. And so there was certainly an aspect of wanting to do good there, but he lost sight of the whole. And as we're specializing more and more in little areas of data, as a whole, the human race, then I believe that, the more we know about physical reality and also, human reality and all of these things in detail, it's a good thing, but we often get it before we're ready for it, right? And this is the fundamental Orthodox story of technology, and all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that we get these things and we partake of them before we're actually ready for them. But they're all there and they're a part of what we're of the journey. But we need to approach with caution and respect and a certain amount of humility as well.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit here, I know we're closing out here. That idea, right, where the fall of Adam, in a sense, we're always kind of looking to, find this wholeness, to find this comfortableness, this we all feel alienated in the world, in a sense, right? What are we alienated from? And I think psychoanalysis is ultimately trying to answer that question, right? What is the source of human desire? What is the source of anxiety? Where does that come from? Why don't we feel comfortable and at home? Because we're not at home. Because I think from, to double click back on the fall, right? So Adam and Eve are both individuals, right? But they're also, the word Adam means humanity, right? And the word Eve means life. So it's individual. It's a fractal idea that, these are individuals, but they're also representing humanity and life. And human beings were supposed to be the caretakers of the earth, right? They were supposed to spiritually mature through communion with God, eat from the tree of life, which would make them immortal. And then they would have access to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But the one commandment was, you shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? What does that mean, right? So to know good and evil is to build civilization, right? So we attempted as a species, and as a people, to build civilization without the appropriate spiritual maturity, right, which we would have gained, by eating from the fruit too early. And that's led to us being, cast out of the garden. So this alienation, this inherent lack that the psychoanalysts put forth in the center of the human consciousness, Jesus calls it this void, I think is a result, ultimately, culminates in the story of the fall. Mm-hmm. The question is, what would civilization building look like if Adam and Eve did not fall? And can we get back to that? And the idea of the incarnation as Christ being the second Adam, right? He comes back to redeem humanity, and not just humanity. It's redeemed the whole planet, all of nature, right? Because human beings, we categorize and we organize nature, right? And that can look like, have a farm with animals that you care and you respect, and then that you use them as sustenance, right? And it's a mutual relationship that you have with these animals. Or it can look like factory farming, where it's this cold, sterile, environment of mass slaughter and death and chaos, right? We are doing that. We have dispensation, we have dominion over the earth. And that's always looked at as, we have power over the earth, we're supposed to dominate it. No, we're supposed to caretake for it. We're supposed to care for the earth. So the idea of the incarnation was that has been made possible, right? Because Christ went all the way down to the bottom of Hades, of Sheol, of Hell, and rescued Adam and Eve, right? From all the way from their bottom, and brought them up. And in that resurrection, it's not just humans that are resurrected, it's the planet that's resurrected. In secular terms, we're seeing the disintegration of, the climate change and the climate crisis. Very secular people actually have a very religious stance. I don't think that most are aware of, right? So they say that you religious people that think there was a flood, thousands of years ago, Noah's flood and things of that nature, that is just superstitious gobbledygook, right? However, because of our behavior, because of our sins, because of our misaiming human behavior, we are creating climate change, the seas will rise and everything will be underwater. So the secular scientists are telling us that because of your sin, because of our sin collectively as humans, well, sinist means to miss the mark, means we're not aiming appropriately. That means we're pushing CO2 in the air. We're not caring about environment. We're taking out the Amazon rainforest, and that is causing the temperatures to increase, which will cause a flood. It is a fractal repetition of that pattern. It exists. And whether you're secular or you're religious, that pattern is there, right? And the ability to discern it, I think is very important in kind of these times. And you can do that a lot of different, secular arguments, and be like, wow, those are very religious. Those are very fundamental and structural, concepts that you're thinking through there. So it's interesting to put that, when you have, and I'm not saying that climate change isn't happening, just saying that, when you have those conversations with the secular types, ask them about that connection there. It's interesting to see their response.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that would, and I really think it would be great if we can follow up this conversation. And for me, a lot of it is about just correcting this understanding. So there's been this tendency to see the Bible as a scientific document or a historically scientific document or something like that, and trying to like say, well, or if it doesn't exactly explain history, and I think Christians are probably the ones who are the most guilty of doing this, and more saying, well, no, that's not what the Bible is about. And so it's and the core of it is really, it's setting out fundamental patterns of reality that we see reflected. And this doesn't make the Bible less true. It actually means the truth contained in the Bible is far greater and far more than just, like describe some historical events that happened in the Middle East a couple of thousand years ago. And it's actually something that can be far more powerful as well. And when you start looking at it that way, then then that's when things start to happen, and then ideas like revelation actually can make sense to you as well, instead of so it's like the idea of like God talking to you, well, yeah, okay, like, oh God, please give me Mercedes-Benz, like that's a lot of the Christianity that we get presented with, right? It's like, okay, no, you didn't get a Mercedes-Benz, or you didn't get cured from cancer, therefore God doesn't exist, right? So, well, no, it's not about like, prayer isn't about ordering things from God or telling him what he should be doing in different situations. It's like, oh yeah, we have 7 billion people in the world, all of them will say, God do this, God do that. Yeah, right. It's more, well, prayer is about modeling ourselves after the image of God, and becoming more like him through a process of worship, because that's what worship is. It's becoming one with worship of money. Then you become after the principality or the pattern of money, right? So great. I think that sets out a good project for me, because when we started this, I wasn't exactly sure, but I think that sounds really interesting and exciting, at least for myself to dig into, and I hope there's going to be some people that want to follow it as well.
Yeah. Like just that piece there at the end, right? You were saying prayer and kind of appropriately worshiping. So orthodoxy, the term orthodoxa, right, means right worship. It means right worship, the right way to worship, in a sense. And if you orient yourself worshiping appropriately, it has a cascade and a fractal effect in your internal life, your psyche, right? It's a solution to psychoanalysis. I know that sounds crazy, right? But your internal psyche, your family, your work family, your community around you, and that ripples out, right? But it starts with you participating. Marshall McLuhan, I guess we can add on. Marshall McLuhan said, faith is a mode of perception. Faith is a mode of perception that you can entrain yourself into. It's something that we lost. Faith is not some, superstitious thing. It's a way of seeing the world again. And we're at a place where, for whatever reason, these ideas are available to us to participate in once again. So.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about it. James, thanks very much.
Me too.
For this. James Kourtides, I'll put the link in the description here if people want to find your podcast. There's plenty of really great information already that people can dig into if they're interested in it. But I think we'll follow this up again with the next conversation sometime as well. Good.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. God bless.
Yeah. Cheers. Yeah, God bless. Stop.